There's a reason your life feels heavier than it should. And it's not just the pressure from the outside, it's the leaks from the inside. Every careless word, every unchecked emotion, every dollar spent out of impulse, every thought left unguarded. That's where your power goes. Control isn't about being rigid, it's about being precise. And most people never get there, not because they lack potential, but because they never learned how to hold their energy. They speak when they should be silent. They react when they should pause. They spend like they're trying to impress strangers, and they think whatever shows up in their mind is theirs to believe. But the man who governs himself, he speaks less, feels deeper, spends wiser, thinks sharper. And it's not because he was born different. It's because he trained for it. Start with the mouth. The average person talks more than they listen, and when they do listen, they're usually just waiting for their turn to speak. Words spill out to fill the silence, to ease discomfort, to cover up insecurity. But the truth is, every time you speak without a clear reason, you lose presence. You weaken your influence. And the worst part is, you rarely remember what you said, but others do. They remember the slip-up, the over-explaining, the apology you didn't owe. Words are like currency. The more you spend, the less value each one holds. That's why people with real strength don't talk much, not because they don't have anything to say, but because they know that saying less makes every word matter more. Speaking with clarity is not the same as speaking to be liked. One builds respect, the other creates noise, and noise, over time, becomes more than sound. It becomes static. It distorts how people see you. It distorts how you see yourself. It affects how you show up in the world. It makes your conversations confusing. It drains your energy. And worst of all, it buries the message you are actually trying to get across. When you speak just to be liked, you start changing yourself, not to be more honest, but to be more accepted. You start adjusting your words to be more pleasant, more popular, more polished. You soften your boundaries to keep people comfortable. You smooth your edges to avoid disagreement, and slowly your message loses its meaning. You don't just lose clarity in what you say, you lose clarity in who you are. Socrates once said, "The greatest way to live with honor in this world is to be what we pretend to be." But there's no honor in making your speech a performance. If your voice becomes just a reflection of what you think others want to hear, it no longer belongs to you. The truth is, many of us have been taught that being liked is the same as being successful, that if we're agreeable, we're safe, that if we're charming, we're accepted. But that way of thinking has a cost. You start to betray yourself in small ways. You agree to things you don't support. You stay quiet when you know you should speak. You smile through things that don't feel right. And you tell yourself you're just keeping the peace, but really you're avoiding a hard conversation with yourself. Because speaking with clarity takes courage. It means saying what needs to be said, even when it's not popular, even when no one claps for it. When your speech loses clarity, your mood often follows. It doesn't take long before things begin to spiral. A careless word turns into inner stress. A dramatic retelling fuels your anger. A few phrases of self-doubt turn into full-blown anxiety. We like to think emotions just show up out of nowhere, but many of them are shaped by the way we speak. We talk in worst-case scenarios. We repeat stories where we were wronged. We rehearse fear like it's a daily routine. And the more we speak it, the more real it becomes. Your words are your emotional GPS. And if your words are all over the place, your path will be too. Chaos in your mouth becomes chaos in your life. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And what we often resist most is silence. So we fill the space, sometimes with commentary, sometimes with complaints, often with over-explaining. That noise becomes our emotional operating system. Insecurities turn into spoken habits. Doubts get repeated until they harden into limitations. It's not just that emotion controls what we say, it's that what we say constantly fuels the emotion. Think of the small phrases you repeat without thinking. I'm so tired. I can't do this. I'm not good enough. These aren't just throwaway lines, they're reinforcements. Every time you speak them, you're conditioning your nervous system to operate from that place. The mouth becomes the entry point for emotional chaos. The more you speak without awareness, the more you feel without clarity. And when emotions spin unchecked, your decisions don't come from vision, they come from volatility. Aristotle explained this perfectly when he said, "Anyone can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy." Emotional control isn't about burying what you feel. It's about holding it long enough to understand it. That's what emotional sovereignty looks like. And it begins with recognizing how your words either steady your mind or stir it up. Most people let their words run wild, not because they're careless, but because they've never learned the value of restraint. Silence was never framed as a strength. We were taught that speaking up means power. But not every thought needs a voice. Not every feeling needs a stage. The more you talk without reason, the less power each word carries. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something." That line hits different when you realize how often people speak not to communicate, but to feel important. Not to bring clarity, but to be seen. The tragedy is that in trying to be heard, we bury the message. We drown out what truly matters. This is where discipline steps in, not the cold, punishing kind, but the powerful kind. The kind that pauses before replying, the kind that chooses presence over performance, the kind that trusts silence when silence is the strongest response. The more deliberate your speech becomes, the more emotionally stable you grow. And when your emotions are stable, your decisions get sharper. You stop rushing into arguments. You stop obsessing over things you said days ago. You stop trying to win conversations. You move with clarity instead of ego. The Stoics had a phrase, endure and abstain. They weren't advocating for suppression, but for strength. Strength to hold what matters and release what doesn't. Strength to sit with discomfort without making it louder. That calm, grounded presence. That's what people feel before you even speak. That's what builds weight behind your words when you finally do. Mastering your mood is the beginning of mastering your path. When your emotions are reactive, your direction is always off. You're not steering, you're spinning. Most people don't notice they've given their control away. They think they're managing things, when in truth, they're avoiding them. Not by facing what's hard, but by finding something to distract themselves. One scroll, one snack, one excuse at a time. We tell ourselves we need a break, but what we really crave is an escape. Discomfort shows up and we treat it like a threat. Instead of holding the pressure, we reach for something familiar, a song, a snack, a screen, a conversation that pulls us away from ourselves, not because we're weak, but because we've been taught that pain is a sign something's wrong. But most of the time, pain isn't a warning, it's a teacher. We've been sold the lie that peace comes from feeling good all the time. But real peace? It comes from facing what doesn't feel good and staying steady. That's how resilience is built. That's how you stop running from life and start leading it. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And he was right. Facing yourself means sitting still long enough to feel the things you've been running from. It means breathing through anger instead of exploding with it. It means letting fear exist without letting it take over. It means understanding that sadness doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. But still, we run. We mask what we feel with cheap comforts, because that's easier. It's easier to point at the day, the job, the weather, the traffic. It's easier to shrug and say, "That's just how I am," as if being moody is something you inherited, as if losing control is just part of your personality. But the truth is, none of that is who you are. It's simply what you've repeated, and what's been repeated can be replaced. Aristotle believed that virtue is something we grow into, that character is built through habits, not handed down at birth. If you've learned how to panic under pressure, then you can learn how to stay calm. If you've learned to lash out, then you can learn to pause. If stress makes you collapse now, with enough repetition, it can teach you how to stand tall. But it doesn't start with force, it starts with awareness. The next time the pressure rises, don't run from it. Instead, notice it, give it a name, watch it carefully. Most of the time, it's not about fixing what you feel, it's about understanding where it's coming from. Something as simple as sitting with the feeling, even for a few minutes, changes your relationship with it. You don't need to rush to change it. You just need to stop running from it. That's the beginning of emotional discipline, not acting like everything's fine, but also not letting every feeling push you around. Real discipline isn't cold, it's calm. It gives you options, and the more you practice it, the clearer everything becomes. You stop being ruled by emotion, and you start leading with clarity. And when clarity enters, better decisions follow. This is where the ripple effect begins. Emotional instability doesn't just affect your mood, it shapes your money. Many financial mistakes don't come from lack of knowledge. They come from emotional chaos. The wrong purchase at the wrong time, the quick fix you didn't think through, not because you needed something, but because you needed to feel something. That pair of shoes, that latest gadget, the delivery food you didn't even want, the expensive night out that felt hollow by morning. None of it was really about the thing, it was about the moment. You were tired, you were restless, you were unsure of yourself. The purchase became a distraction, a soft bandage over a deeper discomfort. The problem most of the time isn't the spending, it's the emotional state behind it. That's the part most people don't notice, but that's the part that shapes everything else. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself, and that includes the part of you that keeps chasing comfort instead of learning to sit with discomfort." Money decisions made in a place of instability are rarely good ones. People don't invest wisely when they feel scared. They don't save when they feel emotionally drained. They don't spend with clarity when they feel lost. And here's what stings the most. The world knows this. The world banks on your emotional reactivity, the marketing, the notifications, the urgency. It's not built for your rational mind. It's built to poke your insecurities, to stir your fear, to nudge your boredom. And if you're emotionally ungrounded, you'll spend, not out of desire, but out of imbalance. You'll call it a reward, but it's really a reaction. You'll call it self-care, but it's really self-avoidance. You'll call it treating yourself, but what you're really trying to treat is the tension inside. But this cycle doesn't have to continue. There's another way. You can pause before you purchase. You can breathe before you swipe. You can feel the urge rising and still decide not to act on it. That's not restriction. That's direction. That's power. You don't reclaim control by cutting joy out of your life. You do it by choosing joy that aligns with who you are, not joy that's forced by a moment of emotional weakness. You start to tell the difference between purchases that build your life and ones that drain it. You learn when you're investing in your future and when you're just trying to numb your present. When your emotions are balanced, your relationship with money changes. You stop chasing what sparkles. You stop needing things to validate you. You stop spending to be noticed. Instead, you start spending with intention, with purpose, with inner peace as the guide, not impulse. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But in today's world, it's the unexamined impulse that does the most damage. One small decision made from the wrong emotional state can ripple out for weeks, for months. And the damage isn't just financial, it's mental. It reinforces a pattern. I feel bad, so I buy. I feel empty, so I spend. I feel restless, so I consume. You don't need to cut yourself off from everything. You just need to understand what your decisions are really trying to solve. Are they building your foundation or just filling a hole? Because the truth is, no purchase can fix how you feel if you're disconnected from yourself. The item might arrive, but the emptiness stays. But the good news, you can rewire it. You can choose differently. You can slow down. You can listen to what your body is really asking for. You can create space between the feeling and the action, and in that space, your power returns. Not because you denied yourself, but because you finally decided to stop running. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. But there's something else just as dangerous, the unexamined impulse, especially when it comes to money. Because every unexamined impulse is a seed of regret waiting to grow. It doesn't always show up immediately. Sometimes it takes the shape of debt. Sometimes it creeps in as dissatisfaction. But eventually it makes itself known. This isn't about being rigid. It's not about depriving yourself. It's about becoming rooted. You don't have to deny yourself the things you want. But you do need to understand why you want them. You need to know what part of you is reaching out with your wallet, whether you're building your future or buying a moment of relief, whether you're aligning with your purpose or just distracting yourself from your discomfort. The shine fades, the package gets opened, and if your inner world hasn't changed, you're left with the same ache, just with a little less money. But when you start doing the real work, the inner work, things shift. You don't just spend less, you spend better. You stop looking for things to complete you. You stop using money as a substitute for meaning. Your spending becomes a reflection of your values instead of your emotions. You begin to invest in what makes you grow, not just what makes you feel better for 5 minutes. And you walk into spaces already full, so you don't need to prove anything to anyone. That kind of wholeness can't be bought. It's earned through discipline, through silence, through consistent choices made from presence, not performance, from intention, not impulse. The world won't tell you this. It will sell you the opposite. It will reward your reaction, your distraction, your emotional spending. It will push messages like, treat yourself, you deserve this, buy now, figure it out later. But dopamine has debt, that quick hit of pleasure. It often comes with a slow burn of consequence. You don't always see it in your bank account, but you feel it in your habits, your focus, your energy. The more you soothe with spending, the more your nervous system starts to depend on consumption for comfort. That's how addiction begins. Not always with drugs or alcohol, but with behavior that feels harmless because everyone else is doing it too. Society has normalized reactive spending. You had a hard day? Buy something. You feel overlooked? Spend big. You're tired, unsure, unmotivated. Retail therapy. But this kind of therapy is a short-term fix. It's a band-aid over something deeper. The relief fades quickly, but the emptiness, that tends to linger. Carl Jung said, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And one of the most powerful ideas people live under today is that your value can be bought, or at least displayed. That in order to feel worthy, you must own something. That in order to belong, You must show that you belong. And this idea, it owns people. It shapes how they spend, how they compare, and how they define themselves. But money, like words, is power. And just like words, most people don't use it to strengthen themselves. They use it to be seen, to be admired, to feel significant. Not because they truly want the thing, but because they want to feel something, respected, validated, in control. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power, and money is power. So the way you handle it reveals who's really in charge, you or your impulses. If you spend to fortify your life, you're using money as a tool. If you spend to impress, you're using it as a mask. Every dollar you spend tells a story, not just about your tastes, but about your priorities, your character, your discipline. Are you buying to build or buying to broadcast? One leads to peace. The other leads to noise dressed up as confidence. Sometimes the broadcast is subtle. A luxury item you can't really afford, but you post it anyway. A dinner you didn't budget for, but you wanted the photo. A designer piece that wasn't for your joy, but for your image. That's not empowerment. It's emotional outsourcing. Using purchases to say what you haven't figured out how to say on your own. Eventually, the performance ends, the audience moves on, the post gets buried, and you're left with yourself. Same emotions, same insecurities. Only now, there's a receipt attached. That's the price of emotional spending. Temporary validation, long-term cost. Aristotle believed in eudaimonia, a life of flourishing not through indulgence, but through purpose and virtue. True happiness, he said, wasn't found in excess, but in excellence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and living in alignment with it. So the real test isn't whether you can afford something, it's whether the purchase reflects the person you're becoming. And if it doesn't, if it's just another attempt to fill a gap inside yourself that can't be filled with things, then no price tag will ever feel worth it. Eventually, the applause dies down, the likes stop rolling in, the high disappears, and the deeper ache returns, untouched, unchanged. That's the moment where most people buy again, but it can also be the moment where something different happens, where you pause, where you observe, where you choose to stop pouring your power into things that don't return it. Because financial freedom isn't just about income, it's about internal stability. It's not about having more, it's about needing less. That's where your real strength begins. Aristotle believed in the concept of eudaimonia, a kind of flourishing that doesn't come from pleasure but from purpose. He taught that real happiness isn't found in indulgence, but in disciplined action that aligns with your higher self. That's why the way we spend matters, because our spending either reflects who we're becoming or who we're trying to impress. And often, it's not even about impressing people who matter. It's usually for strangers, or worse, people who aren't even paying attention. We spend our peace chasing approval in a race nobody else is watching. We trade our internal alignment for a moment of external attention, and that's a trade that always ends in loss. The shift begins with a simple pause, a new reflex. The next time the urge to spend rises, slow down. Notice what emotion is fueling it. Maybe it's boredom, maybe stress, maybe loneliness. Instead of reacting, face the feeling. Breathe through it. Write it down. Move your body. Make space for presence before making a purchase. Because sometimes what you're reaching for isn't a product, it's peace. And peace doesn't come in packages. It comes from self-respect, from self-awareness, from knowing you had the impulse and didn't follow it. That kind of restraint builds something stronger than satisfaction. It builds trust in yourself. It builds confidence, not the kind that comes from having, It's the kind that comes from holding. Socrates once said, "He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have." If you aren't grounded in what you already are, no purchase will ever fill that space. It might give you a quick lift, but it won't build the mindset that sustains real peace. And without that mindset, even a full bank account can feel empty. Financial discipline isn't about being stingy. It's about being deliberate. It's knowing that your worth isn't tied to what you wear, what you drive, or what you post online. It's tied to how aligned your actions are with your values. Real strength shows up in those small, invisible decisions that no one claps for, but that change everything over time. Every dollar you spend is shaping something, either your future or your facade. You're either planting seeds for growth or scattering your energy on temporary highs. The truth is, no amount of shopping will make you feel like enough if you haven't decided you already are. And that kind of belief, that grounded, silent knowing of your worth, can't be bought. It must be built. Built through awareness, through discipline, through the quiet choice to stop letting the world spend your power for you. Each time you resist a reflex purchase, you reclaim a piece of your energy. Every time you prioritize your values over your urges, you move closer to freedom. And that freedom, it's not loud, but it's life-changing. Underneath all of it, the way you talk, the way you feel, the way you spend, lives the way you think. Your mind is the soil everything else grows from, and most people leave it completely unguarded. They allow any thought, fear, or belief to take root. No filter, no awareness, no protection, just noise masquerading as truth. Your mind isn't a dumping ground, it's a control center. If you don't guard what enters, you can't control what leaves. Your words, your decisions, your behaviors, your habits. Most people don't realize this because they confuse mental activity with mental authority. A loud thought isn't always a true thought, but if you never slow down, you won't notice the difference. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what happens when you let your mind go unexamined. You start reacting to fears that aren't yours. You live out patterns you never agreed to. You follow stories that were planted by others, your upbringing, your culture, your past pain, without stopping to edit the script. Silence changes that. Not silence as in muting the world, but silence as in meeting yourself. Sitting with your thoughts without obeying them. Watching them come and go. Learning which ones serve you and which ones don't. That stillness, that awareness, is the beginning of reclaiming your mind. But stillness isn't easy. It reveals things. It shows you the patterns you buried under noise. It makes you confront the discomfort you drowned in distractions. But that discomfort, that's the beginning of clarity. That's where real change starts. Plato said, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And the battlefield is your own mind. Because if you can't sit with your breath without checking your phone, if you can't feel peace without external validation, if silence makes you spiral, then you're not free. That's not calm. It's dependence. Freedom starts when you stop reacting to every thought, when you catch a pattern before it runs you, when you create just enough space between stimulus and response to choose something better. That tiny space, that split second of observation, is where your power lives. You don't need to believe every thought you think. You don't need to follow every story your mind tells. You can stop, watch, choose again. And every time you do, you take back control. You step out of chaos and into command. That's how mental clarity is earned. Slowly, silently. Through deliberate attention and repeated choices. The more you train your mind, the less power you give to noise. The more calm you cultivate inside, the less chaos controls you outside. So how do you take the mind back? You begin by stopping the cycle of reaction. You learn to catch the thought before you follow it. When anxiety rises, you pause, not to suppress it, but to examine it. You start to separate signal from noise. You become a witness to your thoughts, not a slave to them. And the more you observe without jumping in, the more space you create between what you feel and how you respond. That space, that split second of awareness, is where your power lives. That's where the shift happens. It's the place where you stop being a puppet of your fear and start becoming the author of your choices. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," but there's something just as urgent. The unobserved mind is not worth following. You can set goals, chase dreams, build plans, but if your mind is chaotic, you'll sabotage every step. You'll talk yourself out of opportunity. You'll overthink progress. You'll retreat from discomfort, not because the world is against you, but because your own thoughts made it feel that way. And here's the part no one wants to admit. No amount of success on the outside will save you from disorder on the inside. You can have the money, the followers, the accolades, but if your internal world is a storm, all of it will feel empty. That's why so many people achieve more than they imagined, yet still wake up with anxiety, emptiness, or dread. Peace isn't the reward for success. It's the prerequisite. Aristotle believed that happiness, eudaimonia, comes from living in alignment with your highest self. Through discipline, through virtue, through reason. But none of that is possible when your thoughts are scattered, loud, or reactive. Because in the absence of awareness, the only voice you hear is the one yelling the loudest. And that voice is usually fear. That's what keeps us trapped. Not just the thoughts themselves, but the way we cling to them. We replay the moments that made us feel small. We carry memories of failure like proof. We rewatch conversations that are long over, rewriting them in our minds to soften the pain. We create worst-case scenarios and then live in them like they already happened. It's not because danger is everywhere, it's because the brain is trying to protect us. And in its effort to prepare us for pain, it begins to expect it, all the time, even in peace. That's how anxiety grows, not because something bad is happening, but because we've been rehearsing it in our heads for so long that our nervous system believes it already has. This is why mental training matters. Just like physical discipline, it requires consistency, repetition, intention. You start by noticing the patterns, the thought that shows up when you're tired, the belief that arrives when you fail, the story you hear in the quiet when no one's watching. Then you name it, you look it in the eye, not to fight it, but to understand it. You stop treating every thought like truth. You start editing your inner dialogue instead of obeying it. Because the moment your mind becomes yours again, when you stop feeding every doubt, every fear, every story you never chose, you create room for something else. Clarity. You stop reacting. You stop chasing. You stop spinning in loops that go nowhere. Your decisions sharpen, your presence deepens, your focus cuts through noise, and you finally begin to live, not by momentum or panic, but by choice. That's when life begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you got quiet enough to see clearly. And in that stillness, a deeper truth reveals itself, one that's been there all along. You don't need to control the world. You only need to command your mind. Once you do that, nothing outside of you can ever own you again. Master your mouth, your mood, your money, and your mind, and the world no longer pulls you out of alignment because you're finally anchored within. That's the shift. Quiet, but undeniable. When your inner world is steady, the outer one begins to move with respect. If this message spoke to you, there's another one waiting, right there on your screen. Watch it next. Let it take you deeper. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, where clarity replaces chaos and silence becomes strength.